Hey there. Can you read through the notes that you've got so far? And I'm here. My name is Leslie Barry from Exponentially, and I'm here with Patrick Smith or Paddy from Tabcore. I've given you a bunch of notes and a framework. We want to do a case study. We want an open-ended conversation just to capture some information and trigger our memories. So read through the 8 or 9 point framework that you created for me, and act as the interviewer and guide us through the conversation. Over to you.
Absolutely, Leslie. Let's get started. Hey, Patty, thanks for joining. Let's take a trip down memory lane and capture the journey we've had over the past 18 months. We'll use this as the basis for our case study. I'll guide us through a few key points to spark some memories and insights. First, warm up and scene setting. Patty, let's rewind to around September 2023. What was the trigger that made Tabcorp consider changing how you validated ideas? If you had to describe the state of experimentation at Tabcorp back then in one word, what would it be and why? Second, remind me of the
Pause,
current
just stop
headcount.
there and ask one question at a time and wait for Paddy to answer.
Got it. I'll take it one question at a time. So, all right, Patty, let's start from the beginning. What was the trigger that made Tabcorp decide to change how you validated ideas back around September 2023?
We Thinking back, the key drivers at that particular time was that we had a problem in relation to our bets in product. We had a problem around return on investment and being able to deliver products that deliver value that were validated by the customer and weren't just things that the business wanted to do. We were lucky enough to have some leadership that had worked with Leslie previously, and I'd also had a real passion around driving experimentation and innovation and growth, both from a COVID project many years prior. So I'd come off the back of a really large transformational project around building the new app, and I was looking for a new challenge and looking to really uplift and change how we think and how we work. And that culminated at an initial introduction to this framework and way of working, an initial meeting that I know had been going on in the background before I got full wind of it.
And it also aligned with yourself. You set yourself a goal like a year before you wanted to do innovation.
Yes.
So it was all...
Yeah, I'd said I had a post-it note that was very much around solving the problem of innovation at Tabcorp. So I'd seen an opportunity many years before, and I never knew how to solve it. I'd explored various other frameworks and ways of working and had a few false starts along the way. And then a new framework was introduced in September, which was pretty exciting at the time.
That's a great backstory, Patty. It really sets the stage for why the shift to rapid experimentation was so crucial. Next, let's talk about the state of experimentation at Tabcorp back then. If you had to sum it up in one word, what would it be and why?
Traditional design thinking. So I wouldn't have put it as experimentation as such. I don't think there's really, I certainly think we did experiments as such, but it was more around opinion-based things around, do you like this thing? And would you, rather than, would you use this thing? So not that was a bad thing, but it was very much built off traditional agile ways of working, standard design thinking and patterns that were probably 5 years ago best practice in Australia, or at least it was within the Scrum Agile framework community. So I think we were quite good at following that methodology. It just never really gave us the outcome at scale that we were looking for, in my opinion.
That makes sense. It sounds like the shift was driven by the need to move from opinion-based feedback to evidence-based decision-making at scale. Next up, can you describe the state of experimentation at Tabcorp back then in one word and why you chose that word? Haha, no worries if it's tough to sum up in one word. Feel
No,
free to
no.
give a more
Immature.
immature. Got it. That really sets the stage. It highlights how the experimentation approach was still in its early stages, needing more structure and maturity. Let's move on. Remind me of the current headcount and where your innovation unit sits within the broader organization.
The headcount there in product and design would have been 45, 50 full-time and contractors that were looking after probably between 12 and 15 squads. The innovation function didn't exist at that particular time. It was essentially a thought bubble on an org structure. And it was really for us to shape.
Perfect. So around 45 to 50 people in product and design, overseeing about a dozen or so squads, and the innovation function itself was just a concept at that point, waiting to be shaped. Let's dive into the innovation focus. What was the top innovation objective at that?
I've got some more context. That structure at the time, the vision was around building the capability to support those squads for third horizon support. So really trying to think around a view that, how might we win in the 3 to 5 year view of the world, which is something that we'd never considered. The other was we had a ventures team that had just been spun up. And that ventures team was to look globally around how might we actually use this way of working to not only validate the things that we build, but also the things that we might buy or invest in. At that particular time, it was a broad, big vision, and the dotted line on the page had a team of 2 squads of 20 projected to be able to work this way.
That's good.
That's great context. So the vision was to build a capability that supported third horizon initiatives, essentially looking 3 to 5 years out, and to leverage this approach not just for building, but also for global ventures and investments. It was a big, broad vision with a small but ambitious team projected to work this way. Now, what was the top innovation objective at that time? Were you focusing more on finding new revenue streams, improving internal processes, or something else?
It was really trying to uplift the return on invested capital as a primary initial driver through making better bets with the product that flows through the funnel, particularly on things that were opinion-based. So, and the context around that is because we were in a highly regulatory business, there are some things that we just got to do. So we knew that not everything could go through this way of working right from day one, but there was a large enough opportunity, even back then knowing nothing, to know that there was upside by focusing in this space.
Got it. So the primary objective was to increase the return on invested capital by making more informed, evidence-based bets on products flowing through the funnel, particularly those that had previously relied heavily on opinions. Even though not everything could be run through this new approach due to regulatory constraints, there was a clear opportunity to improve outcomes by focusing on this area. That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the
additional context there. The reality is my strong views around opinions was not known at this point to me. I was still to learn that. And that's, if I add the context here, where we were in the timeline, this was just an emerging piece of knowledge for me. And the context that I'm giving you there probably comes from the end state, not from where we are now.
Understood. So at that time, you were still discovering the importance of shifting away from opinion-based decisions. The strong conviction about evidence over opinions was something that evolved as you went along. And that context is more from where you ended up rather than where you started. Thanks for clarifying that. Now, thinking back to those early days, what were some of the key pain points you faced? For example, how long did it typically take to move an idea from concept to validation back then?
That's a really good question. I don't think we had the data point at that particular point of time, albeit we had a very we had an improved cycle time of delivering features. So the previous 18 months, we had become really, really good at driving and improving that funnel. And that was a focus around the transformation. So we had improved and had good, strong data points around that. However, those particular items weren't always giving us the results post-delivery that we had expected. So what we were looking to do was not necessarily, at this particular point, get faster, because we were pretty fast. We wanted to get better at the ideas that went through the
Picking the right
beast.
ideas.
So it was about picking the right ideas, not necessarily improving idea velocity. That came later, but at that particular point, it was a focus around quality rather than speed.
Thanks for that clarification. So at that point, while you had already improved the cycle time for delivering features, the main challenge was that the delivered outcomes weren't always hitting the mark. The focus shifted to ensuring the right ideas were making it through the funnel, prioritizing quality over speed at that stage. That's a crucial distinction. Let's talk about how you chose a prototyping platform. What were your non-negotiables when evaluating tools for experimentation back then?
To be honest, there wasn't evaluation from me. It was an introduction based on historic relationships, trust that have been built from the executive, having worked with Leslie in multiple iterations and having seen value in other organisations. That was really the primary driver around us picking up this way of working. So from my point of view, there wasn't any assessment. There was implied trust or implicit trust that was built from the reputation that Leslie already had, but also through the introductions that it came. So the introductions came through Alan Charvin, Jenny Barnett, and Jack Simpson, all of whom I had a high level of trust, relationships, and when they introduced Leslie to me, there was never a consideration that it didn't match, because they would not have introduced me at this particular point had they not already done the work, or at least that was my mindset.
That's insightful. So it wasn't about a formal evaluation process, but rather a strong foundation of trust and proven value from past collaborations. The introductions and reputation carried the weight, making it an easy decision to adopt this new way of working. Given that foundation of trust, what was one of the key reasons you found Rapidly particularly valuable once you started using it?
I'd probably wind back from Rapidly. Rapidly's the tool. I think before the tool came the understanding around the way of working and the practice of prototyping. And for me, it was within the first presentation, within probably the first 15 minutes. As a product person, have been really driven around trying to build the right product for customers. Instantly, I could see that there was something here that I had been missing that I didn't even know I needed. That curiosity around that really, within, I think Leslie's in my phone as innovation guru, and within 30 minutes, I think, of that initial meeting, we were chatting around how we move this forward. So it was, the tool was irrelevant. It was the way of working and the thinking that I was curious and instantly drawn to.
Yeah, and I think the tool just helped with scaling out the capability across the teams.
Yes. So I'm not saying the tool's not important. It just wasn't important in September.
No. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. The real game changer was the mindset and methodology of prototyping, which immediately resonated and filled a gap you didn't even realize existed. The tool Rapidly became crucial later on for scaling that new way of working across teams, but the initial spark was in understanding the approach itself. Exactly. Now let's talk results. How many discrete experiments have you logged in Rapidly to date, and what are some of the standout outcomes or metrics that really showcase the impact?
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, if I'm honest. There was, that's a really good question, but I think that velocity and the output was something that was really at the end of the journey. while I'm happy to unpack it, I'd be more curious around continuing to focus around those areas around how we started to be able to build to that area. Can you frame the questions around that part of it, please?
Absolutely. Let's keep our focus on the early stages and the ground. Perfect. We'll continue building the narrative from the beginning, laying out how you got to those impactful results. So let's dive deeper into those early stages. What were some of the first big wins or aha moments when you started implementing prototyping? What really made you feel that this approach was the right one for Tabcorp?
The first bit was about myself. And what I mean by that is I had really strong opinions, really what I thought was great data. And first part of it was really about learning and understanding and then retraining myself to think differently, to slow down and to actually understand deeply how it works. And the context that Leslie can add to here was I was manic and out of control in a way that really delivered value around speed to delivery. But that thinking and that mindset was not something that came naturally from me and was actually counterproductive to the methodology and what we needed to move with. So the first bit was really around learning and retraining myself so that I could actually firstly understand that, not assume that I've read it once, but then also be able to build a team around that.
Yeah, and Leslie, just to add to that, so it was interesting to watch over sort of 6 weeks or so as Paddy transitioned from deliver as fast as possible to, or in terms of product, to how do we not slow everything down, but how do we move, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. How do we slow down what goes into the pipeline and put pressure onto running experiments quickly as opposed to delivering the outcomes quickly. And the experiments that would then inform us. So it was a really interesting shift to watch.
That's a powerful shift. It's fascinating to hear how the first big win was really internal, retraining your own mindset from prioritizing sheer speed to understanding the value of thoughtful, quick experiments. That shift from deliver fast to experiment smart fundamentally changed how you approached innovation and built a more robust team culture. Let's continue on that thread. After that initial mindset shift, what were some of the early experiments or changes that really showcased the effectiveness of this new approach?
Yeah, but before we get into that, I think we should unpack that mindset shift, because I think, the conversations that Leslie and I had, particularly early on, and post that, we've learned that he had some real skepticism around me being able to drive this, because there was a perception around who Paddy was. And my history and my understanding of the business was deep. And generally, the types of people that get moved into this particular space are not the people that are broadly connected around delivery. And it was actually a real privilege that the leadership actually gave the opportunity for me to be able to think differently in their time. That's a bit of past reflection. I didn't clock that at the particular time. However, it's really clear that without the leadership seeing the need before I even knew I had it, it wouldn't have ever even started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was super skeptical because often you get hospital past the person that they're trying to promote into a position of incompetence. No offense, Paddy.
No.
And Paddy rocked up and he had this open mindset and curiosity of figuring out a new thing, not automatically rejecting what was new. And at the same time, the magic of being in the organization long enough to connect to the right people. So what's really important with this innovation and experimentation is permission to operate horizontally across organizations so that you can actually get things done. And that needs relationships. There's no magic shortcut to do that. And also the ability to muster resources and not bend the rules, but be able to make things move quickly. And that was super important.
Absolutely. That combination of curiosity, open-mindedness, and strong internal relationships was key. It's clear that having leadership recognize the potential and give you the room to operate horizontally made all the difference. That early mindset shift and the organizational support laid the foundation for everything that followed. With that solid groundwork and the right mindset in place, what were some of the first steps you took to bring this new way of working to life within Tabcorp?
Probably the most unsexy part of it was working with legal and our risk teams from day one. So one of the first conversations that we had once we'd established, the direction that we wanted to go was we worked in a highly regulated environment, and without clear permission from our legal, our risks, our responsible gambling teams to be able to run experiments that felt real to customers. We needed to create a new way of working that managed risk effectively, but allowed us to stretch the boundaries in a way that Tabcorp traditionally wouldn't never have done. So it started with a conversation with Nick Dowsley, who was at that time the head of legal, someone I'd worked with for multiple years. So this is where the long-term trust came in. And we built and co-designed a way of working that from day one had risk management in mind in a way that enabled growth thinking. And that was a key foundational point that inadvertently set us up for success from day one.
That's a powerful foundation. Starting with legal and risk from day one ensured that you could push boundaries while staying compliant, effectively co-designing a framework that balanced innovation with regulation. That early alignment with key stakeholders not only mitigated risk, but also empowered the team to experiment more freely than ever before. That's a great example of laying the groundwork. From there, how did you go about building momentum and getting the broader team on board with this new way of working?
We started in places that felt small, that we had strong relationships with, and in areas that were not high profile for the business at that particular time. So it was really important that we were able to create
Quick wins and to show the direction that we're going, acknowledging that we needed to make sure that we framed that the way we start was not where we aim to end. So it was around building momentum and communicating that broadly, often, and creating visibility around who we are and what we're trying to achieve. So there was also, in addition to that, presentations to nearly every team across the business. There was presentations to the board around what we're looking to achieve. There was challenges that were laid our way, which at the time didn't feel like the most important thing, which was Spark Tank, which came from the executive team who wanted a space for staff to be able to generate ideas. I was skeptical. Leslie and I were both skeptical, and we didn't really want to be able to start that way. However, it actually proved a really valuable galvanizing tool, albeit nothing works as you think it's going to, but having something that was visible to the executive that they wanted at that particular time of transformation was actually a nugget of gold that I would look more favourably on in the future. Also, to add to that is that systemizing the process and making it repeatable. So making sure that there was a regular cadence of weekly and monthly check-ins and reviews, and creating and designing experiments and working systematically across the teams through the idea pipeline, and getting all ideas into one backlog of a pipeline backlog became quite important to keep the engine running, in addition to everything Paddy's just said.
That said, that first iteration of that was messy, broken, and terrible.
Yes.
It was a spreadsheet in a form that barely worked. It was dirty. but it was just enough to get us started.
Yeah.
And it also was a way to be able to showcase something that we were talking about around embracing failure as a learning. And there were parts of that process that were terrible and not scalable, but if we'd waited for perfection, we wouldn't have learned what we needed to do, and it would have actually been a wasted energy around designing a process that we didn't even know we needed at that point.
Yeah.
That
Carry on.
Sure thing. After establishing that solid foundation with legal and risk, the next step was likely about socializing the new approach and showing early wins to build confidence. What were some of the early wins or success stories that helped get the broader team and stakeholders on board with the prototyping mindset and methodology?
I think it was firstly building a team of advocates. So I think before we got out there, we needed to work out who were the right people to help us structure. And the first picked within the team was Graham Harper, who on the face of it would be the least traditional innovator that you could hope for. And Leslie was extremely skeptical in relation to my choice. And why I say that is because Graham is at the end of his career, 2 years away from retirement, but he'd been my rock through my nearly 9 years at Tabcorp. And what I mean by rock is he'd worked in BA roles, he had worked in product management roles, but it wasn't the work that was important. It was the way that he thought and the way that he knew the business and the structure that he brought that I knew was going to be needed in order for us to scale, but also to counter my flaws. I'm not structured. I know that. And in order to succeed and drive, I need really structured people in my team. So I knew that the first person in was about building the non-sexy part of it, which is the framework and structures. And I knew that if I had someone like Graham in the team, key stakeholders would implicitly have trust because he knows the processes. You know, he knows the rules. He's open to challenging the status quo, but he's a good counterweight for my enthusiasm.
Yep.
That's a brilliant strategy. Building a team of advocates with complementary skills and trusted reputations ensured a strong foundation. By bringing in someone like Graham, who is deeply familiar with the business and processes, you balance the innovative push with a solid operational backbone. That mix of enthusiasm and structure likely helped win over key stakeholders and gain traction quickly. With those advocates and the framework in place, how did you approach the first few experiments to demonstrate quick wins and build momentum?
We did it in retail, and we did it in an area that I had significant domain knowledge around an unmet need. And I had a really strong hypothesis that there was opportunity here. So using my experience and domain knowledge, I picked something that was high profile enough to create an engaging conversation, but low risk enough, but also executable. So I think early on, managing risk meant that we needed to do things that were probably on the lighter side of the prototyping methodology, just to prove that it could be done. So the first experiment was, from my mind, had nothing to do with the methodology or the output. The first success was to prove that we could actually test in production in this way.
Yes, test with real customers, yeah.
Because no one had ever done that before. So that was a first.
That's a smart approach. By choosing a high-profile yet low-risk area where you had strong domain knowledge, you could confidently demonstrate that this new method could work in a real-world environment. Proving that you could run a live test with actual customers, even on a smaller scale, was a critical first step in building credibility and momentum. Once that first experiment showed it could be done, how did the team and stakeholders respond? Did you notice a shift in their mindset or engagement?
it was still the honeymoon period. So everyone was quite enthusiastic. I had a high profile within the business, which was a good benefit. We'd worked on creating despite having a small team, a high profile space for us to be able to run this way of working. But we knew that this was very much the start of a very much hard slog, probably harder than I expected it to be, if I'm honest. However, we started focusing in an area in a space in retail for the first 3 months that was really done because it was familiar to me and Graham, who had a lot of domain knowledge in that particular space. Plus, it had been unloved for the entire time at Tabcorp, so it was ripe for disruption.
That's a smart move, focusing on a familiar yet underserved area to get those early wins. Leveraging your high profile and creating a visible, dedicated space helped maintain enthusiasm during that honeymoon phase. It's great that you and Graham could apply your deep domain knowledge to a part of the business that was ripe for a shakeup. So, in those first 3 months working with retail, what were some of the early experiments or results that stood out and helped solidify the value of this new approach?
Hold that question. I think the part that we're missing is the training of the team and the uplifting required around the ways of working, the structure, and the coaching required in order to run the experiments. So you need to remember from when I spoke around, I was crazy and fast and wanting everything done yesterday. Leslie and his team brought in a structure and a way of working that was grating. I needed to learn a new language. I needed to be told off from time to time. I needed to be reined in relation to it. But it was all through mutual trust.
Yes.
And very much every day we learnt something new. And every day it didn't get easier, but it got more curious. What that manifested in was, doing the work. So it's the experiments are the output. The way of working is what's actually really important. What that practically means is you need to gather ideas. You need to learn how to prioritize those ideas. You need to question around those values. You need to connect and bring others in so that you can share the work, because these are not individual pieces of work. This wasn't Paddy and Graham doing this. This was a cross-functional team with key stakeholders and key people that were passionate about driving ideas within retail. So those first areas was, we had allies and people that I talked into giving up their free time and finding ways to actually work in this way for no other reason other than they were interested. They were not getting paid any extra. They were actually having to do extra work. Yet we were able to get a small but passionate group of early adopters to buy in, which was the output of that was, I can't remember the number. I would need to check the records, but we'll add that on later. But I think those first months was around, we were getting excited when we hit our first 5 experiments, and then building from there, continued to come.
Yeah. So just for the rest of this interview, what we'll do is we'll add the number of experiments and particular examples at the end.
Absolutely. That sounds like a solid plan. We'll circle back to those specific metrics and examples at the end. For now, it's clear that the foundation of training, structured coaching, and building a passionate group of early adopters was crucial. That dedication and the willingness of the team to go the extra mile really set the stage for success. All right, let's keep going with the story. After those initial months and early wins, how did you start scaling the experimentation program to other parts of the business?
Through recruiting new people. So I think the early key was around using our internal knowledge. But one of the things that we spoke about is we needed people that weren't as institutionalized as Graham and I. So the key areas that we looked to recruit was we had a hypothesis that we needed a product designer within the team. We also thought that we needed a product owner within the team. Not in the traditional product ownership and product design perspective that we'd used within the squads, but for the nature of communicating internally, we sold it as that. And we ended up recruiting Tabs as a young female non-Australian who was not from the category and really wasn't actually from product too much. She'd done some work in Europe, but not in a tradition. She'd come from a startup world. And we recruited a designer who came in, Michelle, who also came in to fill a role that was being covered by Sherwin and other contractors within the squads. But we always thought we wanted to have a small core team from that point. And at that particular point, this was probably moving forward towards June of that mid-year. It was clear that the initial view around the structures that I spoke around those two big squads was not the reality of the budget and the people that we had. So, there was a reset around what we could do with the people that we had. We didn't take, while frustrated and me annoyed at times, we didn't let that stop our willingness to continue to move forward. We just refocused where we put our priorities.
Yeah, and from Leslie speaking, from my perspective, we shifted the focus to how do we become the custodians of innovation, of driving this through the organisation, and leveraging the product teams to be able to be the arms and legs and brains of the organisation. Because there wasn't a scenario we would have, as Paddy said, we would have these massive teams. We would always have this core team. So how could we get that core team to own the capability of innovation, not become the central point of innovation?
And one of the key early wins was setting targets around experiment velocity.
Yes.
The number of people trained, and also the number of people that were executing on experiments that were not within the experimentation team itself. So we knew that to scale this, it couldn't be this group of people alone doing it. That was not going to be big enough for what we needed. So but we weren't ready to roll this out and scale it across the team. But we knew our long-term vision was to actually, we spoke about a really big, scary goal is for us to not be needed, which, we were very open. And, one of the things Leslie said very early on, you're highly likely to lose your job here, Paddy, which I was not scared of because that was actually the output of great success, is that a standalone innovation function isn't needed because it becomes core to how you work and how your teams think.
And over time, we'll probably get there, but over time we looked at embedding this into the product management framework so it becomes part of the way of discovering ideas as opposed to this separate, fancy, standalone innovation capability.
Yeah, it took think about the toolkit to deliver great products. It's not the answer to everything and shouldn't be, but it was probably framed a little bit like that at the start. So we needed to do a little bit of resetting to probably demystify its purpose.
That's a fantastic evolution. Shifting from a standalone function to embedding innovation into the core product management framework ensures that it becomes second nature for everyone involved. By setting those targets around experiment velocity, training, and broader execution, you laid the groundwork for sustainable organization-wide adoption. It's clear that this journey has been about more than just the experiments. It's about transforming the culture and the way of working. Thanks for sharing these insights. We can definitely circle back to the specific metrics and results later, but this context is invaluable for the case study.
Next question.
Can you keep us on track on the case study? And give us the next question.
Of course, let's keep the momentum going. Next, let's talk about the results you've achieved so far. What are some of the standout outcomes or metrics that highlight the impact of implementing this new approach?
I think the standout one for me relates to QR codes. And if you look at the notes and the last update that we did in November at the end of the project, we started in a space that everyone said was not a great place to start. It's too small. Why are you wasting your time with QR codes? There's a big story which you can pull from the notes there, but ultimately people forget where that came from, but it ended up being a Melbourne Cup QR code on a helicopter to drive conversion in a way that it had never done before. But it also became a standalone piece to drive promotions in conversions in retail and through Sky in a way that had never worked before. Traditionally, our screens had been pseudo-marketing screens and become noise. We were able to turn them through testing in the right space into conversion channels that drove an outcome that was measurable in a way that no one had been able to do before. And we were specifically told by Jenny, why are you playing with this silly little stuff?
Yes.
We had to be bold and ignore the executives and keep powering on, which was a bit risky, but we had faith in the process and the way of working, and the opportunity was there. We just needed the time and the space. So kudos to Jenny and the executive. Despite being skeptical, there was trust in us to keep moving forward.
And just to add to that, a theme that comes with innovation is failure, which we talk about a lot. And in an organisation that talks about winning all the time, because that's the culture, and as they should, the transition was to failing in a safe way. And just to add to what Paddy just said, that those QR codes failed and failed and failed many, many times in the beginning, and we persisted because we learned something new each time and eventually iterated our way through to some of these big wins. So I think it's important for that.
That's a powerful example. The QR code journey really underscores the value of persistence and learning from failures. By turning what others saw as a minor detail into a significant conversion channel, you not only delivered a measurable impact, but also demonstrated the importance of experimentation and resilience. It's a great illustration of how failing safely and iterating can lead to big wins. Thanks for sharing that. Let's move on to how these successes have influenced the broader organizational culture. How have these early wins and the new way of working impacted the overall mindset and approach to innovation at Tabcorp?
This is a really interesting question. There was a moment in time there when it looked like this was going to be a launching pad for digital growth. However, circumstances that were outside of our control, there was a CEO change. The CEO change resulted in that leadership that was passionate around this way of working and this way of thinking no longer being the advocates that we had. Practically what that meant for us as a team was the team was folded in and was assumed we were ready to mature this within the product squads, which we had hoped to do. However, once it was clear that Paddy was back in the world of delivery, the actual empowerment that we had was no longer there. And without that, ultimately the way of working shrunk and left. And while we had, I think, 12 to 18 months of probably the best work that I've had in my career, ultimately the prediction from the start came true that the majority of enterprise businesses that try this are destined to failure.
Yes.
which is an amazing learning for me personally, and I'm not put off by that, both professionally, because I think we learned and we delivered impact to the business. We spoke around prototyping at investor days. It was part of the board. It was a pillar of change and growth. But sometimes things that are outside of your control change the situation. And to me, that's just life. And it doesn't take away from the successes. It doesn't take away from the opportunity that could have come from it, but it's the reality of corporate business. Sometimes the time's just not right. There was a time it was right, and it changed very quickly as the market changed within Australia. And we were affected by that, rightly or wrongly.
And to what we'll add on, you don't have to ask us about this, but we'll add on to the end of this case study is during that 18-month period, how we delivered value from zero to many millions of dollars through cost avoidance and through value delivered to the bottom line and volume and velocity of experimentation. So we'll add that on to the end.
Absolutely. Even though the broader organizational landscape shifted, the impact and value delivered during that period were significant. The success in driving cost avoidance, delivering value to the bottom line, and increasing the velocity of experimentation are clear testaments to what was achieved. We'll definitely incorporate these insights and metrics into the case study. It's a powerful story of innovation, adaptation, and the reality of corporate dynamics. Let's keep going and flesh out the final points of the case study.
Go ahead. Can you continue?
Certainly. Looking ahead, what do you see as the next steps or future plans for the company in terms of scaling or embedding these practices more deeply? Even if the formal innovation function folded back into the broader organization, how do you envision these learnings and methodologies continuing to influence Tabcorp's growth and innovation strategy?
Does this matter for the case study?
I don't think this matters for the case study. What I think is important, though, however, is the learnings for the people that were part of that and how they've been able to take that into the way they think and the way that they drive that in other organisations. So myself, I've now left Tabcorp and are working at Kmart in a new industry at a new Zoom level of lens. And what this experience has given me is an opportunity to think differently about how I would start, but also understanding that the time has to be right. And I think my big learning there is we were very lucky timing-wise. It was the right time for Tabcorp. And then we were very unlucky with timing. It was the wrong time for Tabcorp. So I think there's a little bit of luck around this. And that's, I think that's an unknown that, there's some of the best innovations and ways of working have to actually be the right time. So QR codes, for example, I guarantee you that experiment would not have worked pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So, I think timing and being in the right place at the right time with the right people is as critical as the work. But the work's always a learning.
Absolutely. Timing and context play a huge role in the success of any innovation initiative. It's clear that the lessons learned and the mindset developed during this journey are invaluable, and they carry forward into new roles and organizations. All right, I think we've got a solid foundation for the case study. We've covered the origins, the key challenges and wins, the cultural shifts, and the lasting impact. Let's wrap up by summarizing what you think are the most important takeaways or lessons from this entire 18-month journey that others could benefit from.
Trust and openness. That to me, every person within the team, despite having really strong views and opinions, also was really open to the fact that they could be wrong. And I think some of the conversations that were had and unpacked were the best and also the most challenging of my career.
Trust and openness are indeed crucial takeaways. The willingness to be wrong, to challenge assumptions, and to engage in those tough but meaningful conversations is what drives real growth and innovation. Perfect. We've got a comprehensive narrative and some powerful insights.
I've got one more in relation to that learning. It's the importance of slowing down and having fun. Because, despite us being in a serious place and having serious roles to make revenue and drive outcomes for our customers in a business, all of us learnt to work and think differently and learnt new languages and learnt new things that cause frustrations in current new careers because I see things in a different way that now annoy me, and I thank Leslie for that every day. But I think fun is not something that enterprises encourage. It's actually looked as a way to you're not having and learning. However, some of the times that we actually had fun created some of the best inspiration that was needed in order to work through things that are third horizon. So it is so critical. And if you want to deliver Horizon 1 and 2, you can just deliver and pump it out. But if you want to create something that's truly great, you need to create the space for people to think. And that takes courage from the executives to give them the space and the time to do something that feels on the face of it like you're playing with your mates in the school ground.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic point. Fun and creativity are often the secret ingredients that fuel true innovation. Providing that space for people to think differently and enjoy the process can lead to breakthroughs that structured, pressure-driven environments often can't. It's a powerful reminder that to achieve meaningful, long-term innovation, you need a balance of rigor and play and the courage from leadership to support it. Thanks for adding that. It's a great note to end on and a valuable lesson for anyone looking to drive innovation in their own organization.
Thank you. And thanks for driving the case study. I just want to get this on video. So this is our interviewer. ChatGPT has been driving this whole conversation for us. The way we set this up was to get transcripts of a bunch of the meetings, ask it to work with a case study framework, and then run the conversation for us. So I think that was amazing. Thank you.
It was awesome.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Say goodbye, ChatGPT.
Thank you both. It was a pleasure guiding the conversation. Good luck with the case study, and feel free to reach out anytime. Goodbye.
That's unbelievable.
That blew my mind. What just happened?
I know. Recording camera only. Wow.
Let me stop that.